So in chapter 10, this chapter tells us about a number of data sets, including surveys, official records that are publicly available for research purposes, and then we'll examine several research methods that rely on secondary data, including the historical and comparative research methods, as well as content analysis. So when researchers and policymakers want to understand how crime rates have fluctuated across time or how they compare across different locations, such as cities, states, countries, they generally rely on existing data sources. It'd be virtually impossible for anyone to collect these types of data on their own. The research methods that we've examined so far in this text have relied on researchers collecting the data or information themselves. So we have secondary data analysis, which is the analysis of data that's collected by someone other than the researcher or the researcher's assistants. Inter-University Consortium in Political and Social Research, ICPSR for short. This is a data repository that's located at the University of Michigan. This stores thousands of data sets collected by local and federal governments, as well as nonprofit agencies and other independent researchers. So there's four major types of secondary data. It's survey, official statistics, official records, and historical documents. Many researchers obtain data through the University of Michigan's Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. The majority of data sets that are available from ICPSR and that are appropriate for crime research include the following: census enumerations, the National Archive of Criminal Justice, or NACJD for short, social indicators and behavior, as well as qualitative data sources. So with historical research, we investigate questions regarding the past. They're case-oriented research that we do. This focuses attention on the nation or other unit as a whole. There's temporal research. This is research that accounts for the related series of events that unfold over time. And then we present this in a special methodological challenges is what comes up as a result of this. Documents and other evidence sometimes has been lost or damaged. This presents a challenge. Available evidence may represent a sample bias towards more newsworthy figures. Written records sometimes are biased towards those who are more prone to writing. And then feelings of individuals involved in past events may be hard, if not impossible, to reconstruct. So this oral history, is data that's collected through intensive interviews with participants in past events or times, and so it can be useful to help understand historical events that occurred within the lifetimes of those that were living at the time. So this historical process for research, this is research that examines a series of events that happened over a longer period of time. This is a longitudinal component. It allows for just a deeper understanding or more complete understanding of the historical developments over time. There are some reasons to be cautious for gathering some of this historical methods. Sometimes there's a lack of data that's missing from some historical periods, so you might have some but not all. And then what's included in historical archives may be an unrepresentative selection of materials that remain from the past, so you're not seeing the big picture or all of what may have been presented at that time. So for comparative research, this is when we compare data from more than one period of time and or more than one nation. Comparative research compares data Yeah, like I said, for more than one nation or research. Sorry, I'm repeating myself. And then descriptive research is what seeks to understand the structure, the nature or the scope of a nation's criminal justice system or their rates of crime. And then we have an analytic comparative research that seeks to understand how national systems work and the factors related to their operations. Okay, in content analysis, this is a research method for systematically analyzing and making inferences from the text. We can learn a great deal about popular culture and many other issues through studying messages. This can be an unobtrusive method that does not need to involve interacting with live people because we're just reading, past notes and, information that we're able to gather to systematically be able to go back and analyze, and make these inferences from the text that we're reading. So when we try and identify a population, we want to make sure that it's appropriate to the researcher's question of interest. So whether we're identifying a population through documents or any other textual sources, it should relate to the interest of the researcher. Determining the units of analysis, so this, could be something that we find in an article, a journal, a speech that was written, a diary that was found, anything like that. We have to determine how we can use this information. This could be more microscopic units, such as words or interactions. So we're not necessarily, again, looking at full text documents, but we're sometimes piecemealing things together to understand the bigger picture and the whole concept or, issue that we're studying at the time. So when we select a sample of units from the population, the simplest strategy might be a simple random sample of documents. Sometimes we get into like a stratified sample. This might be needed sometimes to ensure the adequate representation of the sample size that's, being presented to you. And then we have a non-random sampling method that can also be used that can help us to gather information from that population that might be missing, in just a simple random sample of documents or the stratified random sample. The design codes are the procedures for the variables that we're using in order for the variables to be measured. So it's not often an easy task to go about doing this. We really need to decide what variables to measure, what's important, what we want to know, what is it that we want to take away from the research that we're investigating. Next, we need to create categories to try and group the variables or the data that we're finding. And then after coding this information, there needs to be an assessment of reliability needs in the information that we're collecting. So for the base statistical analysis that we're doing, we're counting on occurrences of particular times. So frequency distributions are an important part here. This is like measures of central tendency and variation, cross-tabulations, and correlational analysis. The measures of central tendency is like your the mean, the median, the mode, the range, and then we do a standard deviation from that. And then we have the computer-aided qualitative analysis programs as well. And this could be like, SPSS or using things in Excel to analyze the data and compare numbers. So when we measure things across contexts, these methodological issues that we do when we're using secondary data, we sometimes have to take into account the lack of data that we have from some historical periods or geographical units. It's important to develop a systematic plan for us to identify relevant documents as well as how to evaluate them. So this is a very important part of the process to make sure that the data that we're finding and interpreting is accurate information. When we look at sampling across time and place, we need to compare the histories of different nations. The information might have been overlooked. Um, it could influence global culture, international organizations, or economic dependency. So these are things that we want to keep in mind when we're looking at this information. The possibility of such complex interrelation should always be considered. So if we're looking at like economic dependency, what other ideas relate to that time period? So what are the interrelations or other relationships that we need to consider when we look at the economic dependency? So when we look at identifying causes, there's a method of agreement. And then this method is proposed by John Stuart Mill for establishing a causal relationship or causal relation in which the value of cases that agree on an outcome variable also agree on the value of the variable hypothesized to have a causal effect, whereas they may differ in other terms of other variables. And then we have the deterministic causal approach, and this is the approach in which there's a relationship between an independent and a dependent variable. The independent variable has an effect on the dependent variable in every case under consideration. And then repeated investigations can refine our understanding and then lead to increasingly accurate causal conclusions, which helps support our reliability and validity of the research. And then lastly here is our ethical issues. So we need to analyze historical documents or quantitative data collected by others. It greatly reduces the potential for harm if we're just analyzing information versus working directly with participants. This Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA for short, is the federal law that stipulates that all persons have a right to access all federal agency records unless the records are specifically exempted. So we have access to tons of data and material that's out there that we're not even aware of. It's up to you to decide if there's any issues regarding human subjects when you are using secondary data from a responsible source.